As you all know, the overall theme of the homily series we're doing this Advent season is anticipation. And Webster defines anticipation as to look forward eagerly. And the weekly message this week is prepare the way, hence the Gospel of John the Baptist. As we all know, Advent is a time to return to the basics and put Jesus Christ first in our lives. As we continue our journey through the season of Advent, we lit the second candle of our wreath, and today's gospel focuses our attention on John the Baptist, who prepared the way for Jesus. Let's take a moment and just look at John the Baptist. But before we do, I want to think about when did we all start preparing our way for eternal salvation? When did we start to prepare our way to become one with Christ? I believe it all started when we were baptized, because they talk about in the gospel about repenting sins. Well, when we were all baptized, we were rid of the stain of original sin. Now, we didn't know that, but we did know that after we went to school and learned a little bit about what was taking place. So I believe technically we started preparing our way virtually when we were baptized. Doesn't happen when you're 30 years old or 50 years old or 78 years old like me. That's too late. We have to prepare the way of our eternal salvation every day. If you think back about the Gospels that have been preached the last few Sundays, they all leave the door open, and they all talk about preparing. Talked about the 10 brides, 5 of which didn't have oil for their candles. They weren't prepared. Last week it talked about separating the sheep and the goats because the goats weren't prepared. I very often talk and write about putting the guardian angel on our right shoulder and the evil one on our left shoulder. Life is a choice. We have to choose which direction we want to take, because we're all different. Our paths are all different. That's why I believe God gave us all different DNA. But we still have to make our own choice about how we prepare ourselves. And you can't wait, because you never know when the day's going to come. It could happen tomorrow, it could happen the next day, it could happen in 10 years. We don't know. That's why I say we have to be prepared every day of our life. John the Baptist appears on the scene in the desert, baptizing the people in the Jordan River. Now, we have to understand the Jordan River, really, the significance is, if we think about the Exodus story of the Israelites, who God saved from Egypt, but because they didn't believe that he was truly sending them to the promised land, they wandered in the desert for 40 years. I have a hard time understanding that, but I guess they did. 40 years they wandered in the desert. And when they came to the River Jordan, they realized that they have to trust God. They wandered because they didn't trust that he would lead them to the promised land. And when they got to the Jordan River, they understood that the Jordan River separated, one side was penance and one side was reward and blessing. John the Baptist was carrying out this message for the people. Perhaps we feel we don't really need to be reminded that sin can have terrible consequences in our lives. Why do you think Father talks about that before at the beginning of every Mass. Sin gets in the way. Gets in the way of our relationship, especially with God. But it also gets in the way of our relationship with everybody else, our family. Gets in the way of ourselves. So, that's why I believe the season of Advent is what I call a season of reconciliation or confession. A lot of people tend to seek reconciliation during this time. I can remember in years past here, we'd have 4 or 5 priests scattered around the church hearing confession. And people were lined up out the door. You know what? That's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing. Because we need to ask for God's forgiveness. Why? Because we know He'll give it to us. But we can't take it for granted. We have to understand that we have to ask for His help. We have to ask for His forgiveness. And as I say many times, when we ask, God's not going to say, well, John, I'm busy, okay? Let me put you on hold, I'll get back to you later. Or He doesn't say, well, I'm sorry, this message has to go to voicemail, leave a message for God. It doesn't happen. God is available in the form of the Holy Spirit He left us with 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Let's take advantage of that. The biggest challenge I believe we have is that in this life, in our society, perhaps we become a little bit too cozy with our secular life, not truly understanding that we need God to be with us. Now, He can be with us in so many different ways. All we have to do is ask. So, I look at this season as the coming of the birth of Christ. To me, it's like the second most glorious day, because Easter, His resurrection, is the greatest sacrament or the greatest holy day we could ever have. But we certainly have a secular slant on Christmas. And that's okay. That's okay, as long as we continue to prepare ourselves through asking for God's blessing. And I pray God's blessing on us all this holiday season and for the rest of our lives.